Hi, everyone. So, this episode is still a continuation of the iSpot mentorship that I did in early 2025. The last episode was session 4, where I basically talked to you about everything after that discussion with the agent that was going to, give me advice on my portfolio and talk to me about, how to work with agents and kind of the illustration business side of things, right? So that ended in probably March, I believe. And then immediately after that, I had signed up to go to an illustration conference in Georgia. And that was with the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and really fantastic association. So this group, across the board, professionals are part of this group. If you're interested in writing for children or illustrating for children, which, goes for young adult as well, all the way up to young adult, middle grade, and everything. So basically, it was in Decatur, and I had to prepare a actual physical portfolio with a portfolio book that I was going to have placed in a room with other illustrators, and it was called a portfolio showcase. They had specifications of the size of the portfolio and like how much room you could take. You had to have, that you didn't have to necessarily have, but they recommend that you have postcards created in such a way so that people can take notes about your portfolio or your illustration work or whatever. And I also put out business cards. I had a spot probably in the middle of the room. It was, like a side room in a library, and everyone had put out their portfolios. My portfolio was a little bit larger than the others. I think the maximum size that you could have. And the way that I went about preparing for that, I think, is really interesting. So in this episode, I'm going to walk through some of the details of how I came about preparing for this portfolio showcase. This immediately after the internship or the mentorship, and how I sort of was preparing for all of this basically at the same time as I was working on this mentorship program. And then kind of my feelings after the conference and my experiences with that. And then this next session or this next episode after this one will basically be all on what has happened since then, 6 months after this mentorship program conference, and what I'm doing now. So I hope you enjoy. I hope this is helpful and informative, and maybe, gives you some things to think about as far as, what your portfolio could look like, or preparing a portfolio for any kind of industry, honestly, within the creative industry, but specifically for illustration and children's illustration leaning. So I hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to share with you some of the thinking around my illustration portfolio. So what you see here is sort of my overall process for thinking about preparing for this illustration conference. And this was during the mentorship program and also after the mentorship program. So basically what you see here is that the way that I decided to work on this was based off of some information that I had gained from another illustrator who shares a lot of tips and tricks and things like that. And so they have a list of basically the things that you should have in your portfolio, or examples that you should have in your illustration portfolio, specifically for children. Now, some of this could be applicable to any type of portfolio. And basically, the overall idea is that you need to illustrate and show a variety of different scenarios, a variety of different characters, diversity, locations, backgrounds, day, night, inside, outside, different types of characters, like human characters versus animal characters or things of that nature. One of the things that they talk about is having like a series of pages that kind of go together so that you can show your ability to kind of storyboard and lay out a concept and also carry a character through a story, right? Through several pages, keeping the same look and feel, and being able to show obviously this is the same character, etc. So the way that I went about this, and the general advice is for you to have, I've heard 12 pieces or 15, 20, and I kind of went on the larger side. I can't remember if I saw specific information around this geared towards the conference. Have as many pieces as I possibly could. And then I kind of played with the idea of, okay, like I didn't have a whole lot of children's illustration already within my portfolio. And I needed to add things like daytime and nighttime and inside and outside and different, sorts of scenery and different types of characters, and having more diversity in my portfolio, having more male characters. And so one of the things that, how do I show what I need to show here and in what order? Like, how would this portfolio open up on a table in a portfolio showcase, and how would it present itself? So I kind of thought about it in the way that you would book. So I came up with this sort of concept. So the images that you see along the side here in the bottom are actually, these are artworks that were either completely done or work in progress, partially done, right? And, they kind of have the feel of children's book illustration. They weren't necessarily created with that in mind, but they have that overall feeling in the style that I would like to do, right? So if you look down here, I have this fairy and robin nest illustration, this fairy, the hiding place illustration, these unicorns here, some little fairies and strawberries that have mermaids, and there's a child mermaid. And then I was working on this concept of like a beehive castle or bees, like worker bees. And it definitely has this children's book sort of story to it. And then I've got this sort of preteen girl who's reading a book here. This is All Hair the King, is an older piece that I had done, but I had kind of, like when I was creating it, I was thinking of it as a type character for possibly some story. I had a story in my mind in a way, but not specifically. And then I've got this, I think I called it the Comfy Cottage Tabby, but this artwork here, which is basically an artwork um, of a cat character that has sort of a cottagecore kind of feel to it. And then I was also working on another story. Well, I was working on this idea of fairies like with honeysuckle. And this was an idea that my husband had kind of thrown out there and thought, that would be a pretty interesting idea. And I started working on that and I thought, gosh, this looks like a children's book. Like this has that feel to it. So what I actually did, and I only had a certain amount of time to work on this, I took pieces that were already created and I expanded on them. Okay. So I had, and I kind of worked through and sketched out some ideas and kind of jumping through, like, let's start with the honeysuckle fairies storyline. So across the top here, you see a sort of storyboard. And this has, sort of a page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. I didn't actually end up putting this in my portfolio. And I was struggling with the main character and sort of getting the right feel for her, and then bringing in the fairies that are actually in this original artwork here. I still have this in my to-do. So this is still work in progress. I am still thinking about this project. But this was kind of how I was thinking about pulling together like enough pieces for an illustration portfolio. The next one was, I was thinking, okay, the Comfy Cottage Tabby image sort of inspired me to think a story around a kitten character. And I kind of thought, this would be something along the lines of like an Anne of Green Gables kind of character, but it's cats, right? And so it has that sort of country old time feel to it, and it's very cottagey. And I kind of sketched out a little scene here within the house, and a mother kitty sort of answering the door. I hadn't really pulled that together yet, and that actually I developed it like out of everything. I developed it more than the honeysuckle fairies, and I think that was just because that was a direction that I took. It wasn't, really well thought out or planned in that kind of way. That one ended up actually being in my portfolio, and I actually pulled it out and made some characters, which I'll show you all of that later. This was another idea that I had. I wasn't quite confident in it. And I knew that it was going to take a lot more to accomplish, because what I was thinking is that in one side of the spread, you would have the king hair, right? But then if you continued the background of the king hair over to, the right side of the spread, then you could have like, rabbit followers, townsfolk, soldiers, flags, maybe it's a coronation of sorts. But I thought, okay, like a crowd of rabbits, and then that would need to be all different sorts and have some detail and, a variety of different ages and diversity within this rabbit town, right? Or followers of this hare king, or these hares that are living in the forest. And so I thought, gosh, that's going to be that's going to be like a big undertaking to kind of do a crowd of different characters, right? So I kind of, I started out on that, but I moved on. I was like, okay, that's still on, the docket, so to speak, as far as like trying to develop more stories and more ideas around children's book illustration. So another thing that I was really interested in is sort of a nonfiction, you know, realism with sort of a watercolor whimsical feel, right? And so I'm thinking like sort of like science book, children's science book that you would, learn about like animals or plants or, whatever it is, space or planets or whatever. So I had come up with some other ideas around that, and I was thinking I had already, actually, I'm not sure, I might have already worked on the Eurasia eagle owl concept, which was the left side of this spread, and it was mostly done. But I thought, let's bring in sort of a, about the eagle owls, environment, habitat, eggs, the baby eagle owls, and what that looks like, an example of their feathers or their talons, and sort of their life cycle and anatomy and things. So I did actually finish that, and I'm so proud of that one. That is one that I'm like, I really enjoy doing that, and I feel like I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish in that one. So that one is actually in my portfolio and is finished. But I had also thought just above that in this sort of sketch out, I was thinking about, okay, what is a, sort of a similar type spread, but something that has, like different textures or different kinds of colors or a different kind of habitat, right? So I was thinking more along the lines of reptiles, like frogs, turtles, maybe dinosaurs, some kind of spread along those lines. So again, a nonfiction, very similar to the Eurasia eagle owl layout, but with this sort of reptilian concept instead. I haven't actually started on that or worked on that, but I'm still, it's still one of the things that's in the back of my mind is like, and I want to do this. Another thing that I thought about would be really interesting for me, particular because I enjoy drawing flowers and plants and things of that nature, is doing sort of a nonfiction science, flower anatomy, plants, leaves, nuts, seeds, or how, like how plants are growing, the root system, and things like that. And sort of doing yet again, a nonfiction science sort of book, but with a more, like flowers, plants, that kind of thing. And the idea around this and having these different sorts of layouts is to show my ability to create those things. So it gives you an idea of a range of concepts and themes and textures and ideas that I could create and give examples of, right? So that's the whole point of the portfolio. Another thing that I was thinking about is, like I've got fairies and I've got cottagecore and sort of these old timey things, but I thought, what are a few more ways that I could bring in sort of a present day scene, and also different age groups in like a human sense, like a grandma, a bedtime scene, which would have like, a certain type of lighting and environment within that. That's, okay. Another element would be like water instead of, being in a room or on land with flowers and plants, but doing like a swimming lessons scene. And then, like first day at school, like in a classroom area. And then this would give me the opportunity to draw, older people, possibly more boys, like have boys at the swimming lesson or a boy as the main character, possibly a person of color or, different different types of people and diversity and showing, a wide range. Like I would need to even pull in, some sort of like neurodiversity or, um, disability or something of that nature to, kind of round out like the examples of things that I could draw, right? And do more some spot illustrations instead of full spread, full page sort of layouts. So that was kind of my thinking around my portfolio. And this was how I worked through it. I pulled this stuff into Procreate and I drew it out and I sketched it out and wrote it and was trying to make a plan in this way. So, okay, so this was my final portfolio. And what I decided to do was give sort of a front cover illustration. And in this front cover, this is a group of, 4, 5, 6 different artworks that I've taken and sort of put together. And then this is hand-drawn lettering with, some type of lettering underneath. But I don't know, I was really excited about how that turned out. So the cottage kitty, the cottage tabby, actually turned into a concept of this character named Poppy. And this is a little kitten character. So I created a little cover. And in this specific portfolio page, I zoomed in on some of the detail and then I showed the entire page with a bit of text. And this is just something that, I just kind of came up with. And you can see the cottage core tabby artwork to the side here that looks like that way. It looks like a picture on the cat's wall right here. So all of that was pulled into this particular one. I also added a strip along the bottom, and this was recommended to me by another illustrator from SCBWI. And, it may have been overkill, may have been too much, but that's on every page as well. So then I took this character, Poppy, and basically created this character, this perspective. And then I wanted to show, different moods and different, on the side of her face and a three-quarters view, sadness, happy, worry, that kind of thing. And so I basically did a character design from that one idea, from this one piece that I had done just, a while back. And so then I had also worked on another page within that book. And what I'm trying to show here is dimension and, different kinds of lighting and different kinds of text placement and layout. And so that's what I was showing there. Then this is actually a more finished piece of the worker bees concept. And this was a page layout that I thought, this might be good for someone like a reader, kind of like a new reader learning to read kind of book. So more simple words and, something that can be easily read, larger type, that kind of thing, within these little characters here, which I absolutely love these little characters. I think it would be amazing to be able to do more of a book around these little characters, these little bee characters. And so I actually pulled the characters out and placed them in this layout on the next page. And then I wanted to show, some of the character design aspects of it. And I created 3 more types of worker bees. And this is based on information that I found online about the different types of worker bees. And so there's nursing bees, fanning bees, and water carriers. And so those were three that I thought were really fun, and I put together these sketches. All this stuff I did right before the conference, right? So then I've got this piece. What I ended up doing is just putting this piece in my portfolio and not really doing anything other than that. Same with this one. I'm just doing the full page just to show that. Now this is the one that is a 2-page spread. And so this first page is the left side of the spread, and then the next page is the right side. And so this continues over across the middle, right? So what you see here is sort of the main artwork that I generated. I don't need to say generated. I drew this from scratch and, created a layout and did the zoomed in deep spot.
Which app do you want to open?
Then this is the next page. And here you can see the, sort of layout. Now I did not draw the world map. I did color in portions of it. It's like a vector type of file, which is a basic graphic that you can get free online. And so then I drew an egg to show what that looks like, and a feather example, and then kind of a life cycle, like a small chick to a larger chick that's starting to walk. And I enjoyed this so much. Oh my gosh, I enjoyed doing this so much, because then I got to make the little nest and draw it and think about, how to lay out this concept of a nonfiction sort of spread. This one is another one of those pieces that I had already finished. I just made it a full page, and then I put this on the next page, so it had this spread of 2 fairies pages. This was a series of illustrations that I did in order to enter a competition within the illustration group, and I really enjoyed it, but I think it shows that sort of black and white sepia tone look and feel. So I did zoom in spots of that and the full design, as you can see. And then on the next page, I continue that same sort of theme. It's the same sort of illustration, and, zoomed in on specific areas so you see the details of it, and so the larger piece. So I'm using a bit of my graphic design knowledge here to try to pull the portfolio itself together. And so this is actually an illustration cover that I had done a while ago. I was thinking about sort of a middle grade chapter book, possibly graphic novel kind of concept, and I was trying to made up a character, made up a name, and I came up with an idea. And so this actually shows a cover and an inside page. Like if there were color inside pages, a middle grade chapter book, and that also is like multiple characters, right? And so on this page, I did something a little different. I showed the process, like final drawing, detail, and color. And then in the middle here, like right here, this is just the watercolor. And then down here at the bottom is just a sketch. So I've actually got several different, perspectives of these 2 characters. And then I'm also showing a process, final art, watercolor, pencil. All right. So I'm just, the idea around it is to show a variety, like all the different things, like showing, okay, this is my process for doing this thing. Next, I was starting to do these layouts, like book cover designs. And in this, I'm kind of thinking YA, maybe middle grade, something like that. But then, so I kind of gave it sort of a dimensional look to it. And then I pulled out some of the detail elements. And then the next page is just the full artwork. The same thing with The Last Fairy. And part of this is just me showing cover design, right? And cover illustration. Did the same thing with these mermaids, which works really good for a cover, and then pulled out some of the detail elements. This one I did a little bit different, and this is definitely more of a YA, I think. But, you know, I wanted to show that I knew how to create a full cover layout correctly with like the spine and the back as well. And so I actually used templates to mock up some various book mock-ups so you could see, you know, like what this could look like if it were a real book on the shelves, right? And then I did the same here with this one being a really strong piece because I've got, you know, basically hand-drawn type here. So I've created all of this and pulled it into this artwork as if it's, you know, a book cover design. So that is the complete portfolio that I put together and had printed out and put into an actual book that was in a portfolio showcase. And so a lot of these things came together, especially like these book covers, because of the illustrator mentorship that I had just gone through. So I was working on things to kind of solidify, you know, the industries and the genres that I wanted to go into, but also that I was advised my work would be great for book covers and that kind of thing. So that's what I was working on. And I feel like before this conference, I was so prepared. And I did it. I feel like I really put a lot of work into it. Proud of myself for following through and creating the work that needed to be in this portfolio and, you know, getting it all done and organized beforehand so that when we traveled to Georgia, everything would be there and I would just be able to put it out there and be organized and ready. And I felt really proud of myself, you know, because a lot of times, especially, I don't know, I've always been a little bit on the sort of neurodivergent side of things at times and could fall behind or not follow through and not finish or miss something or wait till the last minute. So I'm like rushing around like a crazy person. And it wasn't like that. I had it all planned. You know, I was very thoughtful about what I put in my portfolio and how I, you know, pulled it all together and what order it was in. And I'll probably also show you just sort of a flip through so you can see the actual physical portfolio and see how it looked when, you know, you went through it and everything. Very fun. I really enjoyed putting the portfolio together because it was kind of like, you know, I'm getting to sort of, I don't know, sort of relive or redo a, you know, portfolio type thing. Because, I mean, as a graphic designer, illustrator who's been working for, you know, 20, 25 years, I put together a portfolio, like a physical book portfolio, in a long, long time. And I felt really good about it. I felt so confident in what I had done. And I didn't know what was going to come of it, you know, because at these conferences, there are agents and there are writers and other illustrators, and people can, you know, take notice, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a project or a specific, you know, job or anything out of it. But at this conference, you basically, you know, signed up for various classes and professionals, you know, review your portfolio, review everything that you've brought and talk to you about it or whatever. And some of the, feedback was really interesting. They felt like my work was very rich, so much, very rich. And I get what they're saying, that it's like, I mean, it's fully illustrated, you know. I put in all the detail and I don't do the simpler commercial, more like, colorful shape and texture kind of illustration. I'm doing more detailed illustration. It's different. And I mean, it kind of goes back to traditional illustration in the past. But of course, with digital printing and things like that, it's a little bit different. You don't have to work with spot colors and things. But I don't know. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really great. The illustrator mentorship with iSpot really helped me pull that together and kind of think about it and work through getting those pieces all combined, right? And all finished and in order, and be able to, like say, okay, this is the stuff, right? And I don't necessarily recommend that you do it that way because you should be drawing all along and you should be creating these things all along, and I was, but wasn't doing it in the sense of this is going to be in an illustration portfolio. I needed to sort of flip my perspective and think about it that way, and then pull in elements that were going to support that perspective, like making it into a book cover or adding interior pages or creating a back cover and a spine or whatever it was, or doing character sketches and things like that to support the idea that I've been working on these things. And I'm really excited. I've continued to give myself more projects, and I've been thinking about stories and trying to put together some ideas, and that's how things progressed, from that. So in the next part of this series, I'm going to go a little bit more into that and give you more of a behind the scenes the past 6 months after going through the illustrator mentorship and going to an actual illustrators conference. So that's going to be really interesting to share, and I hope you enjoy it.